Hey guys, Montel here, and welcome to this edition of Let's Be Blunt with Montel, where we're slicing through the fog of cannabis information and misinformation and shining a light on the so-called cannabis education gap. The cannabis community is at a crossroads. Knowledge, as they say, is power. It's king. But the spread of inaccurate information and accurate information seems to be at a bottleneck right now. What we're seeing is a chasm between what is known by the industry and what reaches the end consumer. And sometimes even experts get it wrong, which only widens the gap. Well, today we welcome a very special guest, cannabis journalist and author, Andrew Ward, who's going to help us unpack the layers of misunderstanding that cloud public perception of cannabis. Andrew, thank you so much for being a part of Let's Be Blunt with Montel today, sir.
Thank you so much for having me, Montel. Really excited to be on. Big fan.
Absolutely. And I'm excited to have you. Look, let's start from where you are from. Let's talk a little bit about you and your background, where you come from, what brought you to this position.
Yeah, absolutely. So originally came from the Atlantic City area in southern New Jersey. Grew up there, did all my high school time. Then I went to school in northern New Jersey at Montclair State University. And about 25, I moved to Brooklyn. I wanted to kickstart my career. It was right around the time of the recession of '08 or so 2010 at that point, and wanted to take a stab at getting some sort of writing career going. And I originally wanted to write horror movies, and didn't end up getting off the ground there, and ended up in a couple of office jobs trying to make ends meet, and eventually found myself at a startup in 2017 doing all right for myself, but just really looking for something different. And I ended up going into freelance writing and wasn't really sure where I wanted to go, but I just knew that there was a lot of stories to tell and a lot of ways that I could do it from a non-traditional office setting. And after about 3 months of searching, I heard an interview with Dave Grohl from the Foo Fighters, who said, find something that you love to do and find someone that'll pay you for it. And I just happened to be smoking a bowl at the time when that happened. And I looked there, put two and two together, and I said, let's take a shot and put this passion of writing and passion for the plant together. And I had, thankfully, a little bit of a sales and marketing background as well as a creative writing background, and started writing for cannabis publications and started doing copywriting for brands. And it kind of came together. And now it's been about 7 years in the industry. Like you said, I've written 2 books. I've talked to some great folks, including yourself. So it's been an incredible journey, and hopefully it'll be continuing for much, much longer.
Sure. Now, I mean, you again, you said you were sitting there smoking a bowl, so you had been a cannabis enthusiast for a while, right?
For a little bit, yeah. I of all my friends, I used to actually get razzed about in college because I didn't start until college. But I would still say kind of early. I started around 18.
Uh-huh. And initially, was it just because of your own personal use? I understand that there's a story that you had about how CBD helped your dog.
Yeah. So that actually is a little bit later in the process. But that definitely was a deeper connection to it than just a recreational use. And when I was younger, I started recreationally and then found a benefit for myself. But like you said, with my dog, that came about 2 years ago. She is a little beagle, Jack Russell, a tiny 15-pound dog. Kind of one of those long-bodied dogs with low legs, and those types of breeds are pretty susceptible to an injury called IVDD, which is essentially a herniated disc at the back and leads to paralysis for a lot of dogs and ends up taking the lives of a lot of them. And my dog ended up having that. She got a grade 4 out of a grade 5. Prognosis didn't look great that she would ever walk again, but we were pretty determined. And through her rehab facility, she went to an aquatherapy place, which I know sounds pretty bougie. I never thought I would do this for my dog, but I'm happy I did because it's seen great results. And we found this place called Water for Dogs, where they do electrolysis, but also put them in the pool and on the treadmills and use water treatment therapy to help the dogs, with knee injuries, hip injuries, back injuries, like my dog. And one of the things that was really great to see on there was they were advertising CBD as one of the recommended supplements out there. And, it was nice to see that being normalized and, one of the, just being out there in the forefront for it. And she ended up needing CBD, not so much for the general recovery of the injury, but she ended up getting put on some painkillers for a tooth that got taken out in the process, as well as some other medications along the way with her related to her back injury. And CBD really helped a lot more than the prescription drug she was put. The prescription drug she was given. Between the back injury, it tends to lead to, without getting too graphic, a lot of bowel movement accidents and things like that. And the prescription drugs were causing way more problems. And after about 2 or 3 days of seeing, really bad results from my dog, I got her on CBD. I talked to the doctors about it, and I also talked to her trainers who were big CBD proponents already behind it. And we ended up using that as her treatment regimen going forward. And ever since then, we've been seeing great results, never really having any problems with it. And it's just between that and her walking again, it's a long story. I could go on forever, but she's
Oh,
she's
no.
doing great.
No, it's a great story, and you should go on forever because I think a lot of people that are listening, need to know that, and that's part of what they need to know about cannabis and cannabinoids in general. I mean, look, you heard this term, cannabis education gap, and first of all, what do you think about that? And how long has that buzzword been around now?
Yeah, that's I think that's one of the, if you're in the cannabis industry, as Montel and myself are, I think you see a lot of buzzwords get thrown around a lot of times. And I would say cannabis education gap is one that's been around for a little while. I've seen lab studies about it as far back as at least 10 years, probably further back than that. So it's a term that's out there, but it's one of the buzzwords that actually I think is accurate and is one that is a concern. And it's only getting wider as the market becomes larger. There's a lot of fundamental basics that I feel a lot of consumers, a lot of newcomer buyers, a lot of parents, basically any demographic essentially, that really don't understand the plant in a lot of ways unless you're actually intimately hands-on with this plant. And it's creating a lot of misunderstandings about it. And thankfully, cannabis is not a deadly, non-addictive, or low addictive sort of substance. So there isn't as much of a risk profile as some other drugs or substances or alcohol, or where there's miseducation. But it's still concerning because people use cannabis for the medicinal purposes. They're looking for just specific relief. They're looking for different kind of results. And if they're not getting the right information, it's going to hurt them with what they're buying at the counters. It's going to hurt them when they're talking to their children. It's going to hurt with so many different areas. And like you said, it's only growing wider. So it needs to be addressed, but it's a big issue.
Well, it's one of the things that I've been talking about. I'm telling you, so I've been in this business now for over 24 years, and
Right.
I've been talking about this every single step along the way. We do a fairly decent job from a B2B standpoint of giving people information, but we do a piss poor job B2C, and I'm talking B to consumer. We don't,
Mhm.
I mean, it's one thing that we complain about it all the time about the fact that the pharmaceutical industry can get away with doing a lot of things that we can't get away with doing. However, the pharmaceutical industry has gotten one thing right, and that is going directly to the consumer and letting them know about products and what those products' outcomes could be. So, that's the reason why when you turn on your television or you turn on the radio, it's like, on a TV, it's every 5 minutes, there's at least a series of commercials talking about some medication. And whether you even remember what the name of that medication is or not, you remember that it did something. And remember enough that when you go to your doctor, you say, I saw something on TV about. So that's what the pharmaceutical industry has done. And that's something I think that this cannabis industry really could learn a little bit from. And I know that state law prohibits marketing individual brand products, but it doesn't ban marketing and talking about information from an educational standpoint. And I have said it over and over again. Education in the cannabis space is as important as location is to the real estate market.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, I think people always say, we want to bring in the market, we want to normalize the plant. Well, the best way to normalize the plant is educating people about it, teaching them and giving them the right information about it. And yeah, you're 100% right there. We've done a really bad job at communicating it out to the public. There's just so much confusion. I recently worked with council member Shahana Hanif in Brooklyn with her district, and we did two different parent forums about cannabis. Well, the first one was a community forum, which basically turned into a parents forum. And then the second one was dedicated towards parents in general. And it's just so much questions about, just consumption for themselves, communicating messages to their kids, not even on the medical level. There's so much to that. The regulatory levels, it's really, there's so much that needs to be conveyed. And, like you said, there are opportunities. We don't have the advertising, the marketing that pharma has at this point. We might in the near future, but we don't at this point. But there are still opportunities to do it. But like you walk into a dispensary, you don't even get most of the right information. You're still getting indica sativa conversations, things like that. And it's really rudimentary at that level. So how can you get into more specific, the more granular, if we're even starting off on the wrong foot?
Absolutely, and I spent a lot of time in dispensaries because I literally have product in the marketplace in Massachusetts, and
Right.
I am completely. And this is not any aspersion against anybody. Bud tenders are trying to do the best they can. However, their 12-second interaction or 20 or 2-minute interaction with a customer doesn't lend for them to be able to extend any information of value to the customers buying the product. You know, and I try to spend time in the dispensary talking about the products that I have so that, they hear it from the horse's mouth. You know what I mean? I can explain to them why I picked the certain terpenes that I picked and why I literally picked the formulations that I picked and put them together this way so that they at least walk out of there educated about everything from their endocannabinoid system to the fact that there are even terpenes. You know what I mean? And a
Right.
lot of places we don't even do this.
Yeah, there's so much that people boil it down to indica sativa, and it's one of the things that gets under my skin so much because yeah, there's a little bit of a shred of correlation of those things, but that's not what those terms were ever for. Like you said, there's terpenes, endocannabinoids, the whole plant compounds. Whether you believe in the entourage effect or just some idea of it, that's technically being debatable. But like I think we all know that the synergistic usage of all the compounds really does get the best results in most cases, and these things aren't really being conveyed to people at all. At the end of the day, they're just being told indica sativa, it's going to make me sleepy or it's going to make me upbeat. And
Yeah, I mean,
even a lot of medical
that is so false. I mean, I literally have, people will come up to me and say, "Well, now is your formulations more indica or sativa?" And I say, what you have to understand is that in the last 20 years, we have now produced cultivars where those terms don't matter anymore because
yeah,
everything is such a hybrid. I don't give a damn when anybody lies and tries to tell you that this is a
yeah,
sativa, this is an indica. It's not. You know what I
yeah.
mean? Really, right?
And I love kicking off into that though, because I'm like, oh, but the only exception is if you have a land race, but you probably haven't heard of a land race yet. So we're gonna, go and it goes down to like a more of a plant like nerdy knowledgeness to it. But it's like that's the only way I feel like you can share it. It has to like what you're doing, being on that intimate, like one-on-one personal level, seems to be the only effective way that's really getting it, which is great. But at the same time, we need mass appeal and mass education too, and that I do feel like is coming up short.
Hey, I would agree with you. So tell me some of the common misconceptions that you've encountered while you've been doing your reporting and your writing.
It really depends on what your area you're looking at. I've been fortunate enough to cover a bunch of different sectors over the time of politics, business, culture, things of that. And, it's a lot of the shopping. Like I said, the indica sativa stuff was always the one that bothers me most because I feel like consumers, are the most fundamental parts of this. So that one was really the one that always stood out most to me. My work, like I said, over the last year or so, has really shown me about the parent education gaps and the concerns there. You look at places like New York, where I live in Brooklyn, there's the mass rollout of the market and so much confusion into it. People don't know what is a licensed shop, what is an unlicensed shop. They don't know what is, an irreputable unlicensed shop, which one actually has a decent reputation, what is going on with all this stuff. So there's levels on that sort of area too. Then you tap into the politics side of it. People always have their ideas of politics, sometimes may be right, oftentimes, may not be, or maybe just have one side of the perspective to it. Business, people always with their expectations of what the market is. Business writing was definitely one of the tougher ones at sometimes to cover because you often ran into people making all these claims and, you have to run it and print it to a certain extent. Because they're not wrong at the moment, but a lot of them have proven wrong in the after effect. And I feel like all of that is indicative of just different areas where if we could educate ourselves on, we might be able to close those education gaps as well as highlight some areas where maybe the expert or their expectation isn't as accurate as they thought.
So, Andrew, I mean, what do you see as the root problem contributing to this major cannabis education gap?
It's hard to do it. I mean, at the end of the day, I feel like it's prohibition. The prohibition of it and demonizing it and stigmatization of it put it underground. It's forced, people to not really understand what this was, except for the really dedicated folks who are willing to, risk their necks and their lives for, advocating for this plant and, getting it to where it is today. So, I mean, there's problems that have stemmed out of that. But I think if we're really looking at the root cause, it was, turning this plant into something that it wasn't. I mean, Anslinger and the propagandists, that's basically their whole MO was, they, ran misinformation about, who the plant consumers were, largely steeped in racism, really just kind of, giving misinformation from there. And then, the decades ensuing after, it was largely in the dark. Most of the time when people heard about it, they basically associated it with hardcore drugs and things that were going to really cause damage and, things, just as we know now are just not true. And And if we don't understand those sort of things, then the large public is just starting to catch on to those in the last, sometimes some are just learning now, and others, just catch on in the last few years. How else are we going to educate on the deeper levels? And I think that's a huge problem. Then you combine it with areas like most of the cannabis companies right now can't make money. So if they can't make money, how can they invest in marketing campaigns to get the word out? But then again, you could argue then about the companies that haven't done it to this extent. So that's an argument back and forth there. You could also say something about the digital media model, because it's SEO based and click based, and going deep into subjects isn't really favorable by like Google bot scroller. So there's a whole deep rabbit hole as to why. And I'd like to give you an answer. I say prohibition, and then just all the symptoms that stemmed out of that virus were really kind of where we're at.
Don't you think? I mean, it's about time. I do not really understand why there is such pushback by all the social media outlets and in even allowing education. I mean, it depends on what word we use in this conversation. This interview with you could be pulled for some stupid ass reason, and it's a stupid ass reason.
Absolutely. It's so arbitrary. I mean, look, if you want to say it's federally illegal, so they can't allow this, that, and another thing, sure, fine, I guess. But the fact is, we've all seen loopholes and arbitrary selections, and there's way more awful things that are being said and promoted and misconstrued online that have nothing to do with the plant that can fly by. And I think it really, at the end of the day, is we're not making enough money for these industries and these social media platforms to really support us at this point. So if we're not making them money, they're not going to go to bat for us. Say for all its problems and shortcomings that Twitter/X is now is. But the one thing is, they did go to bat for cannabis, which was surprising, and I think it showed that there's still a lot of red tape. Even the company that says they're willing to go to bat for it, there's a lot of red tape, and I think that boils down to the federal regulations. So I do give them a little bit of an understanding to it, but there's no set rules or no clarifications as to saying, like we said, which word can we use, which word can't we use, give some specificity, and there's nothing to that.
Yeah, especially when it comes to, these guys who we run into this problem with our podcast. I mean, our podcast is an educational podcast, educational tool. I may give a guest or two an opportunity to talk about what they're doing in the business, and they may name their brand. Okay, I get it if they came and said, well, just blank that out, okay? But the conversation about cannabis itself is an educational conversation. And so therefore, I don't see why they feel the need to try to limit people's access to information.
Yeah. And, they can make some set standards. They can give us some policy towards it. Even if we don't agree with it, at least we can know what the rules are to play by them. But if we don't know the rules, how can we even play by them? So they welcome us onto the platform, but then they'll kick us off when they feel like we've overstepped. But then when we ask for clarity, they won't provide any sort of clarity. So, it's just, what is the solution? They do not want us on here at all, because then it drops your numbers down. So I don't really know. It would, once again, it goes back to education gaps. If we were given some sort of education on what you wanted, even if we didn't agree with it, maybe then we could actually play ball. But until then, we're just operating in the dark, and we have to use these tools to get the word out.
Yeah, and again, I do not understand what the difference is, and I do understand. I mean, if I was sitting here and say, well, go out and buy a Montel brand, then I could see them coming down on my head. But if I went out and said to them, what you need to do is find a product that has these kinds of formulations in it and this kind of information along with it with COAs, I don't understand why you're going to step on my head for giving, basically a good public service announcement.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's essentially a public health advisory. It's just getting the word out, letting people know what the right things are, what to be on the lookout for. I think this is the thing that I think, to kind of slightly pivot off, but I think that it fits in with this, is the whole rescheduling versus descheduling debate. I think there's a lot of concern and understandable hesitation towards rescheduling, because a lot of the problems that it causes, and the future problems that could potentially cause, and I agree with those. But at the same time, with rescheduling, we might be able to actually be allowed to promote ads and do stuff online, which that maybe is it a trade-off? No, but maybe.
But and I'm going to say the rescheduling only, that they don't necessarily have to give you the right to promote. So, and especially
Exactly.
if they go to rescheduling, we've got to remember that then that falls under the purview of an organization that for the last 30 years has been against cannabis. Now, all of a sudden, you're going to tell me that the same people who have hated it and put out all that bullshit misinformation and continue to put out bullshit information, now all of a sudden they agree with it, so therefore we should support them. No, I mean, I think FDA takes control over this, it's going to go back to the black market and stay in the black market for another 30 years.
Yeah, and I agree with that, and I'm fully on board with the deschedule over reschedule approach to this. Just the few companies that would survive, I would say maybe then they start getting acceptable pharmaceutical type ads for cannabis, and then you start seeing that pop up. Is that a fair trade off? Absolutely not, but that is the one way I see like getting some sort of leeway on this. Is if we reschedule, you're going to see maybe a few companies pop up with some ads.
Got it.
But like you said, as I said, it's not guaranteed that it could happen either. So. Big
Well,
TBD.
As the consumer, the people who are watching this podcast, as they try to navigate the space, what kind of tips would you give them and give my listeners how to remain curious and critical and what they literally hear or read when it comes to cannabis?
Yeah, I mean, I think really the first thing it boils down to is critical thinking. I thankfully feel like I got taught that a good amount in school. I hear that, it sadly doesn't get taught as much. So like really you got to beat it into your own head. Like don't trust one source, go read multiple sources, go fact check your information. Lab studies are your friend, but also read more than one lab study. You got to go deep. You got to go and double check the information, triple check the information, especially with cannabis, something that you're putting into your body, especially if it's for a medical purpose. You need to understand it. If you have trusted medical sources, that's always helpful. Sometimes you're going to have to do your own research as well with the plant, especially as lab research has lagged behind for so long. You got to do your critical thinking and just really double check your information, triple check your information. And then when it comes to media side of things, really kind of it's hard to do it, but try to see the history of the company. Try to understand if they've had any red flags or controversies with their information. Have they been caught sharing misinformation or things like that? Be on the lookout for that. It's easier said than done, but you got to kind of dig in and look at who the reporter is, who the publication is, who the outlet is. Really kind of just dig into it and see if there's common themes. More than one or two people reporting on it, then you're starting to get a good sign. But even then, be skeptical about it, and also understand that the plant is still being researched. So even the stuff that we do think is confirmed sometimes tends to shift a little bit. So there's just a lot of variance to it. And I really, you got to do your work. And I wish I could give a little bit more detail, but just do your work and really triple check, double check, all that sort of stuff.
And how do you see the role of technology evolving and bridging the cannabis education gap? Meaning, like, are there any specific tools or platforms that have caught your attention?
I think that there's a lot of great platforms that are starting to get into the education side of things. I think Green Flower has done a really good job getting some industry education out there. A company called Rootworks was one that I saw that was doing some good stuff on the grower side of regulations. There's a lot of stuff on the industry side of things. I think on the education side, there still isn't a ton. I think there are some smaller apps that are trying to make a play, and I won't say any by name just because I don't think any have stood out just yet, but I know a few good folks behind a few of them, and I hope that they can make it because there's some really good ones out there that are in the early stages. I think the one that I always hear from general consumers for years now is they always go to Leafly. Leafly has always been a go-to source for a lot of people. I love growingmarijuana.com has always been a good source, I feel like, for good detailed information. I would like to see more apps go on there. I know those, I think Leafly and stuff have them on there, but I don't know. I've always just used the .com. I feel like a lot of the app hasn't carried over, but I know apps are usually more accessible for folks. So I would like to see a couple more get in there. But I think right now there still needs to be more to be made. But that goes back to the fact that a lot of companies aren't making money. So, which ones are surviving? Even if they want to get it off the ground, a lot of them are having trouble surviving.
And and then we continue. I mean, what really blows my mind is that again, we are the legalization movement is on charge of the night brigade. They are really out there charging hard, trying to get legalization, adult use, or adult use in more states. And from my perspective, you would think that the states that have adult use would allow for more, whether it be just public information segments on news things, just to be able to give the public and allow them more information so that they can navigate the space that they've now created in the marketplace. But it doesn't seem to be running and jiving together.
No, no, it doesn't. And, it is a big head scratcher because, okay, if the state was filling in and actually putting out the good information, then great, we would have a trusted source. But instead, they're not putting out great information. Some states aren't putting out any information. Meanwhile, the people that want to try to put out a lot of times are limited by marketing and advertising regulations and things of that nature. So it really kind of boils down, I feel like, to community outreach, like community events. And, it's really great. You can educate a few people, but it is a very incremental uphill trudge to get people up there. I think it's kind of like you were saying with with the one-on-one interactions and people in shops. It's kind of on that same level. Like that is probably the most important and influential, but we got to get the word out to a lot more people, and we can't really get it down.
If you think back on 10 years ago, and I'm just saying, go back 20 years ago or 24 years ago when I started this, there was nothing. However, after about 10 years, about 2011, 12, 13, it started being all these cannabis conventions around the country. But then they all ended up turning into B2B initiatives where, you go and somebody's selling you this, somebody's selling you that, somebody's selling this, and they stopped giving the information out to the consumers. So, the last couple of them that I've been to, it's like walking through a room with a whole bunch of people trying to sell me a new, extraction equipment. You don't need that. The industry needs to start focusing on educating the consumer so the consumer will come to the shop and ask for products. And do you see us ever trying to turn back in that direction?
Man, you hit the nail on the head, unfortunately, with all that. I agree with that. And everything feels like a trade show. And, in New York, we had a farmers grower showcase that kind of felt like it was coming back to that, where people in local New York communities could go meet with a couple growers, buy some product, talk to some like-minded folks, a lot of newcomers and a lot of like older people getting back into it. And it was great. And then they discontinued it because it was only to sell off the surplus of the weed that they couldn't sell for a year or two because of regulations. So the whole thing was gone. And it's like, why can't we at least have these things? Like, that's not going to cut into the business. It's not going to cut into anything. I mean, I guess, if you want to say the government doesn't want people to be educated, it could definitely be something to that effect, because that's really the only thing I can think of why you would cut off a farmer's market where people can just get together and talk about these sorts of things. So like, we need those sort of events and those sort of the education. And, it's these events, like you said, these conferences have really all turned B2B, and there's very like not even B2C, just community minded. And, there are a few out there. I know there's some, cannabis consumers, like, I would say, like some of the cannabis writers and media folks, they actually are putting events on that are like really community minded and focused. I know Jimmy Devine, I haven't been out to the Trans Bay Festival, but I've heard a lot of good things about that. Those sort of things are doing it, but they're few and far between. And then when you talk about the other accessibility things, it is really kind of just down to an industry problem. And I think that is kind of goes back to the gap is the industry understands everything, but once we get outside of the industry, no one's really connecting with it.
Sure. Tell us a little bit about the books that you've written. You've written a couple of cannabis books, have you not?
Yes, I have. So I happen to have one here because I tried to be strategic and my light washed it out here. But this is Cannabis Jobs. I wrote this in 2017. Basically, it was a great experience. Got to interview about 70 or 80 different cannabis professionals from varying different levels of success and career progressions in 2017 about how to get a job in about 15 or 16 emerging verticals at the time, and just kind of try to provide some data action steps for people and trying to show them the inroads to the industry. It came out before the industry pinch that happened, so it's a little bit less applicable these days, but hopefully still can be good action steps for people. I'm looking to get into the industry. And then another book I wrote, I don't have it here, but it's The Art of Marijuana Etiquette, which originally was supposed to be a comedy book, and I kind of agreed with that with my editor. And then day one into it, I just kind of said, I can't write this. I'm just going to write an education book and kind of just talk about the etiquette of the industry and kind of build on the traditionals, the puff pass to the left, but then also talking about more societal issues, different issues to be aware of in the cannabis space, as well as just more updated different signs, like how to look for a cannabis consumer, how to ask for a cannabis consumer, a little bit of a lighthearted thing on the culture side. So it's kind of been a good little dabble into the business end and on the culture side with those two books.
And if people wanted to get more information about that, where would they go?
Yeah, at this point, I would say go check out Skyhorse Publications. You might also be able to find them on Simon and Schuster, or just look for Amazon Andrew Ward, and yeah, they'd probably be on there.
You've been in this space long enough, I think, to be able to at least just pontificate a little bit about your thoughts down this path. But I mean, where do you see the industry going in the next 3 to 5 years?
Oh man, I think about this a lot. It's I see it almost kind of fragmenting. I hope it doesn't go this way, but I kind of see the underground medical scene kind of going, their own sort of way. Where we see craft and medical be embraced by a smaller audience of folks, and then we see the big business side coming in. I think rescheduling is going to happen. I think rescheduling is going to alter the industry in some really unfavorable ways to the people that have been in this movement for a long time. I don't think it's going to kill the cannabis spirit or the cannabis community, but I think it is going to test it in a new sort of way that it hasn't been in a while. And I just hope that states or federal, at the very least, carves out a space for the micro businesses, the craft farmers, like those sort of points in the market, and it's not just completely obliterated by big business and pharmaceutical wellness product, CPG, turning cannabis into that, and really just kind of remembering what the spirit of the plan is. So I think it's just going to be a new test in the battle of the cannabis community, unfortunately. But I do have faith in the cannabis community and the faithful, but we'll see how many people follow that side as opposed to the CPG side.
Absolutely. Well, my friend, I got to tell you, I can't thank you enough for being a part of the show today. And you got to keep us up to date on what you're into and what you're doing. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me. If you want to follow me, my social media handles are the Canna Writer on all the social medias, or you can find me at iamandrewward.com. And my email's there if you ever want to get in touch. So please do.
Sure. And one more time, throw out the names of your books.
Yeah, so there's Cannabis Jobs and The Art of Marijuana Etiquette.
My goodness, my friend, I got to say thank you so much for being a part of Let's Be Blunt with Montel. Your insights today have been incredible and enlightening to our listeners. I want them all to remember, understanding the cannabis landscape goes beyond just consumption. It's about being informed, questioning what you come across, and making educated decisions. We hope today's session ignites a spark in you to dig a little deeper, ask more questions, and be an active participant in closing the cannabis education gap. And I'm going to invite you all to make sure you continue to listen, stay engaged, to share as much information as you can with others, and stay informed, and make sure you're passionate about cannabis education and consider joining any advocacy group or even start discussions in your own little circles. So until next time, I want you to stay frosty, stay engaged, yes, stay blunt, and let's keep tuning in to Let's Be Blunt with Montel. Thanks so much, Andrew, for being a part. Thanks for joining me on Let's Be Blunt with Montel. Please make sure you're subscribed and hit the bell to be notified when new episodes post each week. We'd love to hear your feedback also, so please send us your comments.